happens with Cheesman Park is it is part of early Denver during the Pikes Peak Gold Rush of 1858-1859. In March 1859, Denver town founder William Larimer stakes claim to the land that is today Cheesman Park as the city's distinctive elite Mount Prospect Cemetery. However, far from emerging as a beautifully landscaped, well-irrigated garden cemetery, Mount Prospect is soon a dilapidated, unkempt boot hill. Time after time in the 1860s, 1870s, into the 1880s, there are numerous efforts to try to fix up the park, to landscape it, to do something to redress it, but it keeps growing, and before long there's at least 10,000, maybe 20,000 bodies in Mount Prospect, the Denver City Cemetery. By the late 1880s, water finally becomes available. But when water becomes available, the idea is that rather than keeping it as a graveyard, it ought to be transferred into a beautiful central park. However, before the park can become a reality, when the city so resolves it in 1890, something first has to be done with the 10 to 20,000 bodies in the graveyard. To get rid of them, the city lands up hiring the low bidder for the job, undertaker Edward P. McGovern, to move the bodies at $1.90 a head, literally a head. Well, McGovern soon discovers that moving bodies is a gruesome, dirty, back-breaking task, and he decides to skimp on it by using extra small coffins that are about a foot high, 18 inches wide, 36 inches long, and he tells his workers, here, take a skull, put that in one box, that's one body. Here, take an arm and a leg, put it in another box, that's a second body. And right in the middle of McGovern's devious operations, his dirty tricks are exposed, and by the summer of 1893, the city says, enough already. Those having friends and loved ones and family in the park have 90 days to move the bodies. If they are not out of here by November 30th, 1893, they will have to spend eternity in the park. And the upshot is there are somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 bodies still in place in Cheesman Park. And if you know where to look, there are some very, very distinctive rectangular plots in the park that are about 2.5, 3 feet wide, 5.5, 6 feet long, that are slightly depressed from the rest of the lawns. And these spots always seem to get green a few days earlier than the rest of the lawn in the spring. Sunken graves, in other words, and maybe this explains a lot of the bizarre events that have gone on in and around Cheesman Park over the years. Well, part of the problem is 19th century Denver was an extremely deadly city. It had a sky-high infant mortality rate. A lot of people came out here in poor health seeking to improve their vitality. They soon died, and there were massive pauper funerals. Undertakers didn't like the pauper funerals, claiming they weren't making a good enough profit on them, so often they would take the bodies to near Cheesman Park and dump them into undeveloped lots nearby, often simply covering them with a little dirt. A week later, they'd have a second pauper's funeral. They'd open up the grave, dump a second, a third, a fourth body in there, and often in excavating for sewers, other utilities in and around Cheesman Park, workers have found some haunting remnants of these areas of that. And beginning in the 1970s in particular, Denver starts discovering ghosts every place along the way, particularly along Humboldt Street directly to the west of Cheesman Park. But at that time, no house starts to stand out more as being an alleged haunted house than the old Henry Treat Rogers mansion that was off at the northwest corner of 13th Avenue and William Street, directly across the street from Cheesman Park, the place that eventually becomes the Changeling house. The man for whom the mansion is built, which was about a 2.5-story Georgian mansion that goes up around 1898, Henry Treat Rogers, is your ultimate fixer attorney. He is also a key figure in pushing Denver's park system. In fact, probably more than anybody else, he is the person that gets the city to transform the old graveyard into what becomes Cheesman Park. Henry Treat Rogers loved children, but he never had children of his own. After he dies about 1922, the house passes to his niece, Frances Ristine. She also loves children, but never has children of her own. After her passing, the old house at 13th Avenue and William Street remains a single-family mansion, even as surrounding properties are all being carved up into apartments. It had been vacant for about 18 months in February 1968 when Russell Ellis signs a year's lease on it. Russell Ellis, who later takes the stage name Russell Hunter, is born in Evanston, Illinois in 1929. He grows up to be a musical prodigy, an immensely talented pianist, with his family having property up in Boulder to get away from the East Coast. And to get away from the West Coast, he decides he's going to come to Denver and emerge as a serious composer. No sooner has he settled in the Henry Treat Rogers mansion and is happily writing his music than he starts being disturbed by a bounce, 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 bounce. And day in and day out, he hears this bounce, 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 and he can't figure out where the noise is coming from, but the bounce, bounce, bounce is driving him wacky. So he lands up hiring an architect. He goes through the house with the architect, and they discover hidden behind a second-story closet a secret door. They break their way through the secret door. It leads to a hidden staircase that goes up into a tiny attic apartment. They open the door to the apartment, and a striped child's ball starts bouncing down the staircase and vanishes. Amidst this, Hunter goes and investigates the room. He claims to have discovered the diary of an 8-year-old boy, Eric Evans. And if Eric, who was a sickly lad, made it to age 21, Eric stood to inherit a fortune of $70 million. If, however, Eric died before obtaining his majority, the fortune would pass to a distant relative. Well, Eric's parents, greedy for the money, knew that their boy would never make it to age 21, so they decided they loved orphans. And they went out to an orphanage and adopted a replacement boy that they presented to the world as Eric. The technical term for that is a changeling. Meanwhile, they lock the real Eric up in the attic, only giving him a red rubber ball with which to play. Well, soon the real Eric dies, maybe he's killed, and his body is dumped at what was then the far southeast edge of town, near South Dahlia Street and Yale Avenue, and the replacement boy grew up to be a prominent Denver businessman politician. Well, now that the dirty deed was out, rather than exposing it to the world, Hunter sat on it. So once more there was bounce, 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 bounce. And fearing for his sanity, in April 1968, Hunter called in 10, 12, 20 associates. He told them the story. He led them up to the second-story closet. He showed them where the secret passageway opens up the door to the attic, and the striped bouncing ball again comes down. And this time somebody grabbed the ball, gave it to Hunter. Hunter put it in a lockbox. The next day he drove up to Boulder Canyon, and he tossed the ball out into the Rocky Mountain wilderness and came home glad to finally be done with the cursed ball, only to open up the door to his house, and there's the red rubber ball bouncing down the main staircase. Well, amidst all of this, Hunter is starting to fear for his sanity, and he consults a local psychic, and they have a 3-night-long seance. But amidst all of this, Hunter just won't expose the dirty deed to the world, so it's bounce, bounce, bounce in terms of all of this. Finally, in an act of desperation, he lands up convincing a couple of Episcopal priests that are into spiritualism to exorcise the house. They bless it with Jordan River holy water, and the bouncing ceases. But now the piano starts playing under its own volition. Nailed shut windows open and close themselves on this. Mirrors explode. Fireplace grates explode too on that. Books fly around the place. Every morning there is a hideous striking of water pipes around 6 a.m. So by the time Hunter's year's lease has expired, he just can't handle the violence, the chaos of the Henry Treat Rogers mansion, so he gives up the lease and moves out to a modern ranch-style house on South Kearney Way near Iliff Avenue. The Henry Treat Rogers mansion is thereupon slated for demolition. According to Hunter, on the morning when the wrecking crew showed up, the house gained its revenge when it exploded and killed a member of the wrecking crew. Now the problem becomes, what happens to a ghost when the house it is haunting is no longer in place? That over the years there have been a wide variety of children's programs directly to the north of Cheesman Park, and often the kids play in the park, and now and then they encounter a sickly 8-year-old playmate with an antique striped play ball on that, who seemingly dematerializes of that, where you need to be aware of what kind of balls might be bouncing around Cheesman Park. The replacement building, today known as the Summer House at 1313 William Street, is haunted. And over the years, people have unwittingly gone off on the wrong floor on the elevator. And as soon as they're out of the elevator, they suddenly hear beautiful concert hall quality piano music. And if they go and they ask who is in that apartment, they're told there's never been a piano in that apartment. Then late at night, sometimes people going down the stairwell encounter the bouncing ball. None of the members of the Phipps family add up to fill in the gap of who the Changeling might have been. The one family that everything seems to implicate on this is the Betcher family. Charles I is a stern Prussian immigrant. His son Claude is in his father's footsteps, but Claude's son Charlie Jr., who's born about 1900, the same year allegedly as the Changeling was born on, that is never like his grandfather or father. He has an extremely troubled youth, on this. He later ends up being kidnapped. His wife commits suicide on him. He has severe drinking alcohol problems. And about the time he dies, about 1962-63, he has a 5-year-old nephew, Spicer Breeden. And a close relative of him, Charlene Humphrey Betcher Breeden, plays a crucial role in the Changeling story. Victor and Charlene Breeden are the couple, the developers that knocked down the Henry Treat Rogers mansion and built the summer house at 1313 Williams in its stead. No sooner had they completed 1313 William Street than Charlotte Breeden's health collapses. She lands up dying in her 40s of breast cancer. What exactly did the Henry Treat Rogers mansion look like? And actually the cover art of my book, The Ghosts of Denver, Capitol Hill, is my artist's impression of what the Henry Treat Rogers mansion looked like. And she drew this basically on a photo, or actually it was a newspaper clipping I had given her about the story about the impending demolition of the mansion. If you go over today to the summer house at 1313 William Street, in the lobby they have a picture of the house that they claimed used to stand there for Henry Treat Rogers, which looks quite different than this. And I'm convinced that this house was actually about 5 blocks away over at 18th Avenue and William Street. But then the problem is when you start dealing with ghosts, are you just dealing with them as a cynical, objective observer, or do they subjectively start messing with your mind and sources and other things along the way?